Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to break down exactly how a localized anti-colonial struggle in Southeast Asia snowballed into the absolute bloodiest proxy conflict of the entire Cold War. We're talking about a 30-year saga, the Vietnam War, or more broadly, the Indochina Wars, that completely rewired global geopolitics. It fractured societies, and honestly, it pushed the very limits of what superpower militaries could actually achieve. To really understand this, we're going to trace this three-decade timeline across six main acts, starting with a world in microcosm, moving through the First Indochina War, crossing the 17th parallel, looking at the dominoes and credibility, the expanding and contracting war, and finally, how the final dominoes fall. Let's dive in. All right, part one, a world in microcosm. The historian Frederick Lagevall really hit the nail on the head when he said this wasn't just some isolated regional squabble. It was literally a microcosm of the entire 20th century's ideologies crashing into each other all at once. Think about it. You had the French desperately trying to cling to their pre-war colonial empire, you had Vietnamese nationalists fighting for their independence, and looming over the whole thing was the massive, emerging Cold War binary of communism versus democratic capitalism. Now, what's wild is how the physical geography of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia basically became a blank canvas for the world's superpowers to project their worst fears onto. At first, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin saw Southeast Asia as a total backwater, and Washington just viewed it as a French colonial headache. But as the Cold War froze over in Europe, the deep geopolitical anxieties of Washington, Moscow, and Beijing started mapping directly onto the jungles and deltas of this specific region. Which brings us to part two, the First Indochina War. Okay, so the game completely changes around 1949 and 1950. Mao Zedong's communists take over China, which means Ho Chi Minh suddenly has a massive, heavily armed neighbor right on his northern border. Beijing and Moscow officially recognize the Vietnamese Communist government. And in direct response, the United States, who are terrified of a coordinated communist sweep right across Asia, start pouring immense economic and military aid to back the French. So by 1950, we aren't just looking at a colonial rebellion anymore. This is officially a Cold War proxy battle. But here's the kicker. All those American dollars, they couldn't buy a French victory. The devastating French defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954 proved a really harsh reality. Conventional, heavy military dominance means absolutely nothing against a dedicated, highly motivated nationalist insurgency. Despite having way better weapons, the French just couldn't control the countryside, because that's where the Viet Minh had overwhelming popular support. So what happens next? Part 3, crossing the 17th parallel. After the French are pushed out in May 1954, the Geneva Accords step in that July to temporarily partition Vietnam right down the middle at the 17th parallel. You've got the communists in the north and a US-backed government in the south, with nationwide elections planned for 1956 to unite the country. But Washington and the new southern leader, Ngo Dinh Diem, know that Ho Chi Minh is extremely popular and would likely win those elections, so they simply refuse to hold them. Fast forward to October 1955, and Diem officially proclaims the Republic of Vietnam in the south. The huge problem here was Diem himself. He was incredibly inflexible. We're talking harsh crackdowns, rampant corruption, and severe religious persecution that totally alienated his own people, especially the peasants and the Buddhist majority. This internal repression was the spark that ignited a southern guerrilla insurgency. It started out independent, but soon enough, it was being supported by former Viet Minh fighters. This group became famously known as the Viet Cong. By early 1961, Hanoi officially authorized armed struggle, and what started as internal dissent exploded into the Second Indochina War. This is where things escalate fast. Part 4, the dominoes and credibility. You have to understand how the justification for war was shifting back in Washington. In the 1950s, President Eisenhower was warning about the geographic domino theory, basically the fear that if Vietnam fell, its neighbors like Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand would literally just topple over into communism, one by one. But by the 1960s, under Presidents Johnson and Nixon, that fear morphed. It became this absolute psychological obsession with preserving international credibility. Policymakers started believing that if America didn't stand its ground in Vietnam, its allies all over the world would doubt its promises, and its enemies would just be emboldened. So in a weird way, the war became less about Vietnam itself and way more about protecting America's reputation as a global superpower. Driven by this desperate need to project strength, President Lyndon B. Johnson uses a highly disputed naval skirmish in August 1964 to push through the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This was a game changer. It essentially handed the president a blank check to wage war. By February 1965, the U.S. unleashes Operation Rolling Thunder, which was this massive, relentless bombing campaign against the North. And just a month later, the first American ground combat troops are landing. The floodgates were officially open. That leads us right into Part 5, expanding and contracting war. Over 500,000. Let that number sink in for a second. By 1968, the U.S. had deployed over 536,000 troops. But despite dropping an unfathomable amount of bombs, napalm, and toxic defoliants like Agent Orange, all that American technological advantage was constantly being offset. They were facing a tenacious, nationalist insurgency that just seemed to have an endless supply of recruits. The North Vietnamese absorbed incredible punishment, rebuilt their supply networks overnight, and matched every single American escalation step for step. Then comes January 1968, and the Tet Offensive completely flips the script. Now, militarily, this was actually a failure for the North Vietnamese, but psychologically, the sheer scale and coordination of the surprise attacks totally shattered the American public's illusion that victory was right around the corner. It completely fractured the domestic consensus back in the U.S. When Richard Nixon takes office, he introduces something called Vietnamization. The idea was to slowly pull American troops out and shift the combat burden onto the South Vietnamese army. But here's the paradox. While Nixon was shrinking the troop count, he was actually expanding the war's footprint, launching highly controversial secret bombing campaigns into neighboring Cambodia and Laos. Now, before we look at how this all ends, it's really important to look neutrally at how historians debate this conflict today, because this debate still heavily influences modern military strategy. On one side, you have the orthodox view. This perspective argues the war was fundamentally an unwinnable anti-colonial struggle, and that the U.S. was basically fighting against the unavoidable tide of history. On the other hand, the revisionist view argues that it actually was a winnable Cold War proxy conflict, but that the U.S. lost because of terrible military strategy and a lack of political will at home. Basically, it's an ongoing debate over whether the war was flawed from the very concept or just flawed in its execution. And finally, Part 6, the final dominoes fall. By January 1973, Henry Kissinger and Lee Duc-tho signed the Paris Peace Accords. On paper, it looks like an agreement to finally end the war. The U.S. promises to pull its remaining forces out within 60 days. But crucially, and this is a massive detail, North Vietnamese troops are allowed to remain right there in the South. So while it gave American forces an exit strategy and got their POWs home, it was a remarkably fragile peace. The ceasefire was violated almost immediately by both sides, and without the backing of American combat support, the South Vietnamese government was basically living on borrowed time. By April 1975, the cyclical nature of this entire conflict plays out in the most tragic way. The image of American helicopters desperately evacuating personnel from the rooftops of a falling Saigon is undeniably a visual echo of the defeated French forces back at Dien Bien Phu. Two major Western powers, 21 years apart, both ultimately forced into incredibly humiliating exits. The human toll here is just staggering. It's hard to even wrap your head around. An estimated 3 million Vietnamese lives were lost, alongside over 58,000 Americans. This war completely devastated societies and ecosystems across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. It directly contributed to the rise of the brutal Khmer Rouge, created massive waves of refugees, and left the United States with a deep, lingering reluctance to ever get involved in foreign military interventions again, a feeling often called the Vietnam Syndrome. So, we leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. In that relentless, decades-long pursuit of global credibility, did the superpowers actually achieve their grand geopolitical goals? Or did their interventions simply guarantee 3 decades of unparalleled human tragedy? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning everything.